Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are getting into some really high-stakes material. We're looking at the daily interdisciplinary mentorship brief from KING-KAMBUF.
And this is a specific one Monday, December 29, 2025. This isn't your typical project level stuff.
No, this is designed to elevate your thinking. The mission here is to look at the built environment, not as just a collection of buildings, but as a system.
A system of civic and ethical leadership, especially when it's under stress.
And the brief gives us two huge areas of uncertainty that modern architects have to master. First, what happens when the ground itself moves?
Seismic risk and governance. And the key word there is governance.
Right. It's not just about calculations anymore. It's probabilistic, it's political, and the decisions you make are, well, irreversible.
And then from the ground, we go global. We're talking about resource governance and supply chain risk.
The logistics, the brutal reality of getting materials to a site in a volatile world.
Anticipating scarcity, managing wild price swings. It's a whole new ballgame.
Yeah. So the goal for you, listening to this, is to get a shortcut. We want to show you exactly where architecture stops being just about form and function and becomes high-level strategy.
Where it intersects with economics, public administration, and, some really deep ethical questions.
Master this, and you're positioned for a true leadership role in this industry.
All right, let's jump in.
Okay, let's start with seismic risk. The sources here are pointing to a really massive shift in thinking.
A philosophical shift, really.
Exactly. It's no longer good enough to just treat seismic stability as a math problem you hand off to the structural engineer.
No, the brief argues again and again that seismic risk is, at its core, a governance problem.
So what does that mean exactly? A governance problem?
Well, think about it. We have the technology. We know how to build safe new buildings, pretty much anywhere. The codes for new construction are incredibly sophisticated.
Right.
But governance is about the whole city, not just the shiny new tower. It's about the existing buildings, the political will to do something about them, how you allocate money.
And crucially, how you talk to the public about risk.
That's it. Because you can design the perfect, safest building in the world, but if the city block around it completely collapses, what have you really accomplished? Your job isn't done.
And this really comes to a head with mandated changes. We're seeing cities starting to look backwards, not just forwards.
Historically, codes were all about tomorrow's buildings.
Regulating new construction.
But now you see cities in these high-risk zones, places in California, New Zealand, Turkey. They're starting to pass ordinances that mandate retrofits for existing buildings.
That's the real game changer.
It is. It forces everyone, architects, building owners, city councils, to confront the legacy risk of the 20th century. You look at any downtown core, and most of those buildings went up under much, much older codes.
Sometimes decades before we've even understood modern seismic concepts, things like ductile detailing.
Exactly. So dealing with that huge stock of existing vulnerable buildings, that takes a civic mandate. It's a political act.
Which puts the architect in a new role. The brief calls it policy translation.
I like that term.
You're suddenly the person in the middle. You're the intermediary between the incredibly dense language of seismic science and the hard realities of a city budget.
You're taking something like the ASCE 41 standards, which are, let's be honest, almost unreadable for a layperson, and you have to turn that engineering analysis into a construction scope that is buildable and, more importantly, fundable.
Which means you have to be fluent in risk.
Completely fluent. You have to be able to stand in front of a city council and explain, in plain English, why they need to spend $10 million on a building that, to them, looks perfectly fine. Building that's been standing for 60 years without a problem.
And that gets to what the sources say is the single biggest leadership hurdle. How do you communicate probabilistic risk to people who weren't engineers? The whole idea of odds is so abstract.
It is the ultimate challenge because it's not a certainty. It's not this will fall down. It's a probability distribution.
Right.
If you go to that council and say, there is a 7% chance of a major collapse in the next 30 years, what do they hear?
They hear there's a 93% chance that everything will be fine.
Exactly. The human brain is wired to dismiss the small number and focus on the big one. But in this game, that 7% could mean hundreds of lives lost and billions in economic damage. It's a low probability, high consequence event.
So how do you make it real? How do you make that risk feel tangible?
You have to change the framing. You use analogies, you talk about consequences, you stop talking about percentages and you start talking about it like an insurance policy or a massive societal liability.
Can you give an example?
You could say, look, this building, as it stands today, has the same risk profile as getting on an airplane when you know the mechanics found a serious, unaddressed mechanical failure.
Ah, okay. That lands differently.
It does, because you're shifting the focus away from the likelihood of the plane crashing and onto the unacceptability of the consequence if it does.
So the architect's job is to really quantify the difference in those consequences.
Yes. You show them the gap, the difference between a building that's just life safety compliant versus one that achieves immediate occupancy after a major earthquake. That gap, that's the vulnerability, that's the financial and social risk that the client is paying you to eliminate.
So the sources are clear. You have to be able to move fluently between an engineering model and a financial model. That's the leadership competency.
And that need for clearer outcomes is really what drove the whole industry away from old-school prescriptive codes.
Right, towards what they called performance-based seismic design, or PBSD.
It's a totally different approach. Prescriptive code was, basically a minimum compliance checklist, a rule book.
Use this much rebar, make the concrete this thick, and you're good.
You're legally compliant. But compliance doesn't mean it's going to work after an earthquake. It just means you followed the rules that were written down.
So PBSD gets past the checklist.
It does. It becomes an explicit agreement between you and the owner about the desired outcome. What do you want this building to be able to do during and, more importantly, after a specific level of earthquake?
And big institutional clients, hospitals, universities, tech companies with data centers, they're demanding this now.
They have to. They can't afford the downtime. So they're demanding these explicit performance objectives.
Let's break those down because they really define the whole structural approach. The brief highlights 3 main tiers: life safety, immediate occupancy, and collapse prevention.
Okay, so collapse prevention is the absolute bare minimum. It basically means the building won't pancake, even in the biggest earthquake you could possibly imagine. It gives people time to get out. But the building is a total loss.
Just a pile of rubble you can walk away from.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Then you have life safety. That's the baseline for most modern building codes. It means you avoid severe structural damage, you prevent casualties, but the building itself will likely be so damaged.
It's a tear down.
It's a teardown. The primary structure is compromised beyond economic repair.
But immediate occupancy, that's the holy grail.
That is the pinnacle of seismic design. Immediate occupancy means that after a major design-level earthquake, the building remains operational.
You can walk in the next day and get back to work.
Maybe some minor cosmetic repairs are needed, but it's fundamentally safe and functional with minimal downtime. Think about a regional hospital's trauma center, or a critical data facility, or an emergency operations center. They have to achieve this level.
So to get there, you can't just let the structure bend and break.
Right. You have to seriously limit something called drift. And you have to protect all the non-structural stuff, the pipes, the ceilings, the equipment.
Which means the architect and the engineer have to be completely aligned from day one. You're talking about merging spatial design with physics right at the concept stage.
The collaboration has to be intense. If an owner says, I need immediate occupancy, the architect has to understand what that means for the design. It means the structural system can't just rely on ductility, which is basically letting parts of the frame yield and get damaged to absorb energy.
You need something more advanced.
You need systems that actively dissipate that energy without taking damage themselves.
So this is where we get into some really specialized technology.
Absolutely. Now you're looking at things like viscous fluid dampers. They're essentially giant shock absorbers, like for a car, but built into the structural frame of the building.
Or base isolation, right?
Or base isolation systems, which are even more dramatic.
Yeah.
You're literally decoupling the entire building from the foundation with these huge rubber and steel bearings. The ground can shake violently, but the building above just sort of gently sways.
But those systems have massive architectural implications. You can't just drop them in later.
Oh, no, they're huge.
Yeah.
They need specific spaces allocated for them. They need access for maintenance, and they radically increase the cost. Your job as the architect is to design a functional, beautiful building around these enormous, complex machines.
Which brings us back to a really fundamental question the sources pose. Can architectural form itself actively reduce seismic damage, not just passively survive it?
And the answer is a resounding yes. The best architects know this is the first line of defense.
Before you even get to the dampers and isolators.
Long before. A simple, well-proportioned, symmetrical building with a really clear and direct load path is inherently less vulnerable than some complex, irregular shape.
Why is that?
It's just physics. Symmetrical plans distribute the forces evenly throughout the structure. There are no weak points. The right aspect ratio, the height to width, prevents the building from wanting to overturn.
So if your initial architectural concept is full of complexity, say, huge cantilevers or floors that are much stiffer than the ones below them.
You're basically starting the engineer with a major handicap. You're forcing them to come up with expensive, brute force solutions to a problem that you, the architect, created with the form.
It's the difference between elegance and brute force.
That's a perfect way to put it. Elegant seismic design starts with a form that wants to be stable, so it needs less heroic engineering to make it perform. That's mastery.
Okay, so if the new buildings are where we can achieve this technical pinnacle, the sources are also painfully clear about where the real danger lies. Retrofitting the existing city, that's where the future calamity is waiting to happen.
That is the single most critical takeaway. When you study past earthquakes, Loma Prieta, Northridge, Christchurch, the story is always the same. The overwhelming majority of casualties, the huge economic losses, it's all in the older, non-conforming buildings.
The ones built before we knew better.
We are sitting on just a vast reservoir of baked-in risk in every major city.
So let's say you're the architect and you land a major retrofit project, an old city hall, a public library, a block of historic masonry buildings. You are immediately thrown into what the brief calls an ethical balancing act.
A five-way high-wire act is more like it.
Okay, what are the 5 elements you're balancing?
You're juggling the immediate cost, which is always tight. You're dealing with the massive disruption of having to move people out. Then there's the mandate to preserve historic heritage. You've got deep social equity issues. And all of that is balanced against the non-negotiable need for safety.
If you pull too hard on any one of those, the others get compromised.
Every time.
Let's drill down on that tension between heritage and safety. That feels like a classic architect's dilemma. You've got a beautiful, historic, unreinforced masonry building a URM.
Culturally priceless.
But seismically, it's incredibly dangerous. So a full retrofit might mean you have to add steel bracing or new concrete shear walls inside. It could mean gutting the entire historic interior.
And the ethical question is stark. Do you save the exterior facade, the shell of the building, but sacrifice the original interior fabric to meet a modern life safety standard?
Or do you accept a higher level of risk to keep that historical integrity intact?
There's no easy answer. The solution is often about surgical precision. You're looking at really innovative techniques, like using fiber-reinforced polymers wrapped around columns or installing specialized steel elements that are minimally invasive. Things that let the building move a little but keep it from collapsing.
Innovation meeting ethics.
That's exactly what it is.
And we can't ignore the social equity part of this. Mandated retrofits, especially for private apartment buildings.
Well, that's the hidden governance failure. It's huge.
Because the costs get passed on to tenants, right? And you end up displacing the very people you're trying to protect.
You do. If you just create a safety mandate, but you don't provide any funding mechanisms or rent stabilization policies to go with it, the predictable outcome is gentrification. Rents go up, low-income residents are forced out, and the social fabric of a neighborhood is destroyed.
So as the architect, you have a responsibility to be aware of that, to advocate for a more holistic solution.
You have to. You have to argue for publicly funded resilience strategies that protect both the building and the community inside it.
Which is why the sources insist on this reframing. We have to stop calling it deferred maintenance and start calling it civic resilience infrastructure.
The language matters so much. Deferred maintenance sounds like a cost you've been avoiding. It's reactive.
A problem.
A problem. But resilience infrastructure is a strategic investment. It's proactive. It's about ensuring the city's economic and social continuity after a disaster.
Keeping the hospitals, schools, and transit hubs online.
When you frame it that way, the funding conversation changes. You're not pulling from the operational budget anymore. You're arguing for a capital improvement project. It becomes politically easier to justify.
So this leads to the big philosophical question for any design leader. How do you retrofit a city without erasing its character? And maybe more importantly, how do you make this invisible investment valuable to the public?
It's tough, because most of what you're doing is hidden behind drywall. The public doesn't see the new steel braces or the strengthened foundations. They just see the bill.
And they're cynical about it.
They can be. So the key is communication. It's documentation. You have to frame the money not as fixing a problem, but as guaranteeing continuity. You use visualizations. You show them what their city hall would have looked like after the earthquake without the retrofit.
You show them the failure that didn't happen.
You sell the value of the failure that didn't happen.
That requires clear public reporting. It requires tools that translate our technical jargon into a message of civic protection.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics a bit. The strategy is one thing, but you have to have the technical fluency. The brief is really clear on why architects have to understand lateral force-resisting systems.
They have to. It's not a footnote. It's not just the engineer's job. The choice of lateral system fundamentally shapes the building.
It dictates the floor plan, the
The
massing.
facade, the cost, everything. If you don't get the constraints these systems impose early on, you're just designing a fantasy building that the engineer will have to compromise later.
So walk us through the classic trade-off.
Yeah.
Shear walls versus frames. Okay, let's start with shear walls. Picture a big, solid, vertical slab, usually made of reinforced concrete. They're designed to resist forces in their own plane.
So they're incredibly strong and stiff.
Incredibly. But architecturally, they're the enemy of openness. They break up your floor plan, they limit where you can put windows, and they tend to anchor the whole design around a solid central core.
But they're cost-effective.
Very. And they're great at limiting that drift we talked about. So if you need a really stiff building, or the budget is the main driver, they're often the go-to choice.
And on the other side, moment frames.
Moment frames are the architect's dream, in a way. It's a grid of columns and beams that resist lateral forces because their joints are incredibly rigid.
So you get wide open spaces, big glass facades.
All of that. But the trade-off is stiffness. They are inherently more flexible. They manage the earthquake's energy by bending and yielding at those joints. That means they will move more. There will be more drift.
And to control that drift in a tall building,
You need much bigger steel members and really complex, expensive welded connections. So the trade-off is clear. Open space comes at the cost of more movement, a higher price tag, and more complex detailing for your facade.
so if a client comes to you and says they want a completely open trading floor, you know instantly you're looking at a frame system, which means you need to have a serious conversation about drift and budget right away.
Instantly. You know you have a drift problem to solve, and that leads directly to why building irregularities are such a big deal. The physics of an earthquake just hates irregularity.
Because it concentrates stress instead of distributing it. Let's talk about the two biggest culprits the brief calls out for catastrophic failure: soft stories and torsion.
The soft story is just a classic, tragic failure of continuity. Imagine a 5-story apartment building. The top 4 floors are apartments with lots of walls, so they're stiff. But the ground floor is open-air parking with just a few slender columns.
You see these everywhere.
Everywhere. When the earthquake hits, the stiff upper floors want to move together as a single block. But that soft, flexible ground floor can't keep up. It acts like a weak hinge. All the force from the entire building concentrates right there. The columns buckle and the floors pancake down.
And retrofitting those is a major public safety priority.
A huge one. Usually by adding new steel frames or shear walls into that parking level.
Okay, what about torsion, the building twisting itself apart?
Torsion is a profound architectural liability. It happens when the building's center of mass, basically its center of weight, doesn't line up with its center of rigidity, the center of its structural resistance.
So like an L-shaped building plan.
The L-shaped plan is the classic example. Or even a simple rectangle where you put a big, stiff, concrete elevator core on one side and have a light, all-glass facade on the other. When the ground shakes, the whole building tries to pivot around that stiff core.
And the flexible parts of the building get whipped around.
They experience huge, exaggerated movements. The connections fail, the cladding tears off, the interior walls are destroyed. It means that something as simple as where you place your stair core is a critical seismic design decision.
So let's connect all this movement back to the non-structural parts. Why is understanding drift so critical for detailing?
Because keeping the structure standing is only half the job. Drift, that lateral movement between floors, can destroy everything else. In a high-rise, even just an inch of relative movement between floor 40 and floor 41 can shatter every window and break every pipe that crosses that line.
So if you're using a ductile frame that's designed to move, you have to design everything else to accommodate that movement.
You have to adopt a strategy of detailing for deformation.
What does that look like in practice?
Okay, take the facade. You can't just rigidly bolt the glass panels to the frame. That 1 inch of drift will shatter them. So you have to specify articulated seismic joints between the panels, wider gaps with flexible gaskets that let the building sway without breaking the skin.
And inside the building.
Same idea. You need seismic separation joints in your partitions, especially fire-rated walls. All your utilities, HVAC ducts, plumbing, electrical conduit, they all need flexible connections or bellows where they cross between floors to keep them from rupturing.
That sounds like a significant cost.
It is, which is exactly why non-structural components are now so heavily tested and regulated, because they are the #1 cause of injuries and business downtime after an event.
The structure survives, but falling ceilings and toppled equipment make the building unusable.
And dangerous. If the ceiling grid collapses, it blocks your emergency exits and can damage millions in equipment. So now we have to specify and coordinate seismic bracing for all of it. The ceilings, the light fixtures, the heavy mechanical
They're
unit.
usually just simple diagonal wires or struts.
Often, yes. But they have to be coordinated so they don't interfere with the lighting layout or the aesthetics. It just reinforces that interdisciplinary mandate again. You have to think about this stuff early. You can't just cram it in at the end.
Okay, let's put all this together. Let's walk through the professional scenario from the brief. It's a classic. A 1960s municipal office building. It's critical for city services, but it has a known life safety deficiency.
This is a dilemma that basically every major city is facing right now. And the constraints are huge. You've got a limited budget, you can't just shut down city services for 3 years, and the whole process is under intense political scrutiny.
So the first step is a deep comparative analysis. You have to model the options, retrofit versus replacement.
And this isn't just a simple cost comparison. You need to run a full financial model, probably a net present value analysis. The replacement option gives you the best performance. You could even achieve immediate occupancy. It has the lowest long-term maintenance costs. But
The upfront capital cost is enormous.
massive.
Yeah.
And you have the huge cost and disruption of moving everyone into temporary offices for 3 to 5 years.
And the retrofit option.
Retrofit is usually a lower initial cost, and you can often phase the work. So maybe you can keep half the building operational while you work on the other half. But the long-term risk is higher. You might only get it to a life safety standard.
Meaning a big earthquake could still require it to be demolished.
Exactly. So you might be kicking the can down the road. And retrofit construction is notoriously unpredictable. You open up a wall and find things you weren't expecting. The schedule can easily get blown.
So the architect and engineer have to present these options. What are some of the innovative architectural approaches you could propose for a retrofit like this?
Well, a 1960s building is often a non-ductile concrete frame. So you could propose adding new structure to the perimeter, maybe new steel bracing, or even exposed viscous dampers. You could make the resilience, upgrade, an architectural feature.
Celebrate the investment.
Right. Or you could reinforce the interior cores with new shear walls or fiber-reinforced polymer wraps, but then you're sacrificing usable floor space. The architectural challenge is to find the solution that maximizes the structural benefit while minimizing the impact on the building's function.
And once you have these scenarios modeled, you have to present them to the non-technical stakeholders, the mayor, the city council.
This is pure communication mastery. You use visualizations, not spreadsheets. You show them graphically the projected damage and downtime for each option. You have to be crystal clear about the difference between life safety, everyone gets out alive, but the building is gone, and immediate occupancy, everyone is safe, and City Hall is open for business the next day.
You're trying to depoliticize the decision.
By rooting it in verifiable risk models and good financial stewardship.
And the final step, documenting everything meticulously for the public record.
Every single decision, every trade-off has to be transparent. If the council goes with the cheaper life safety option, you and the city have to document that you are all explicitly accepting the higher long-term risk of total loss after a major disaster.
This gets to the source's main conclusion. Seismic decisions are ethical decisions. It's stewardship, not just compliance.
You are defining your city's future vulnerability, and you're making sure the public understands the moral weight of that choice.
Okay, let's pivot. We've mastered the risk of the ground moving. Now, the brief throws another massive uncertainty at us. The risk of scarcity.
We're shifting to material supply chains, procurement risk, and what the brief calls resource governance.
It feels like we're moving from the stability of the Earth to the complete instability of global logistics.
That's a great way to put it. The lesson here is that you have to design with the material reality in mind. The cost, the availability, the lead time for every single component in your building is now a volatile variable.
And that volatility, especially after all the global disruptions we've seen, is severe. The sources point to things like steel, mass timber, cement, glass, copper. All of them are seeing these wild price swings.
And they're tied to things that have nothing to do with construction. Geopolitical conflicts, shifting energy markets, climate events like droughts or floods that shut down mines or forests.
Take structural steel.
It's incredibly energy intensive to produce.
Mm.
So when global energy prices spike because of conflict somewhere, steel prices follow almost immediately. Mass timber is tied to regional lumber supply, which is vulnerable to forest fires and climate change. Cement production is being hit with carbon taxes.
Which means the architect's job is changing. You're not just specifying a material because it looks good or has the right technical properties anymore.
Now, you have to be able to justify your material choices based on their availability and their resilience to these market shocks.
So specification is now a risk management activity.
It's a strategic risk management activity. If your whole design hinges on a single, specialized material that's only made in one factory in a politically unstable region, you are building a massive vulnerability into your client's project.
The big insight here is that material choice is a strategic risk decision.
It is. When you choose to use locally sourced mass timber instead of globally traded steel, it might cost more up front. But what you're buying is a hedge. You're hedging against international shipping chaos and trade wars.
You're trading initial cost for schedule certainty.
And resilience. It requires the architect to think almost like a commodity trader, watching the global forces that affect the price of iron ore and sand and copper.
Let's get into the specific global trends the brief highlights, because they're really changing how we specify. The first one is the regionalization of supply chains.
This is a direct reaction to the fragility that the pandemic exposed. Everyone realized that these just-in-time global supply chains were a house of cards. A shutdown on one continent could bring construction to a halt on another.
So the push is to source locally.
To favor locally sourced and domestically manufactured materials wherever possible.
What's the design implication of that?
It's profound. We're seeing planning agencies start to link building approvals and even financial incentives to the use of regional materials.
So, for example, if you're building in the Pacific Northwest and you use locally harvested and milled cross-laminated timber,
you might get faster permit approvals or tax breaks because your project is supporting the regional economy and cutting way down on transportation emissions.
So architecture is becoming geographically specific again, not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity.
Exactly. You, as a designer, are being forced to become an expert in your local industrial ecosystem. If you're building in the Midwest, you better understand the local concrete and steel fabrication capacity. The most resilient designs are the ones that use materials sourced within, say, a 500-mile radius.
The second major trend is the move towards circular construction mandates. This is shifting from a nice idea to a hard requirement.
It's a radical change in how we view a building's life cycle. The old model is linear. You extract resources, you build, you demolish, and you send it all to a landfill.
The circular model sees the building as a material bank.
A temporary assembly of valuable resources. And public clients especially are starting to require proof of this thinking before they'll even approve a project. They want material passports, reuse plans, and end-of-life strategies.
Okay, define a material passport. What does an architect need to provide?
A material passport is a digital log of every significant component in the building. It tracks where it came from, its chemical makeup, its environmental impact, and, most importantly, detailed instructions on how to safely disassemble it and reuse it in 50 or 100 years.
So you have to specify materials that have high recovery value.
And low toxicity.
Yeah.
It forces you to think in life cycles, not just about the initial assembly.
So the big insight is that demolition is being replaced by planned disassembly.
You're designing a building that's meant to come apart. That's the design shift.
Which means what, practically? Bolted connections instead of welded ones?
Exactly. You prioritize mechanical fasteners, bolts, screws over adhesives, and welds that make separation impossible. You design connections to be accessible, not hidden. You are literally designing the building to be unbolted, sorted, and put back into the resource stream instead of becoming waste.
That requires an incredible amount of foresight in the drawings.
Extreme precision.
So let's talk about the day-to-day management of this volatility. The brief has a harsh lesson. A perfect detail that cannot be built is a failure.
That's where idealism hits reality. If your design depends on a very specific type of glass that has a 14-month lead time from a factory in Germany, and that factory has a fire, your project is dead in the water.
So the ability to substitute is critical.
It's your ultimate tool for protecting the schedule and the budget.
And speaking of the schedule, the sources hammer this point home. Procurement controls the project schedule.
It's non-negotiable. The critical path on a complex project is rarely pouring concrete. It's waiting for the custom curtain wall panels to arrive from overseas or the specialized air handling units.
So you have to identify those long lead items way back in design development.
And either design around them or get the client to pre-purchase them. A delay in one of those components can cause a domino effect that collapses the whole schedule.
This means you have to manage uncertainty by designing in flexibility from the start.
It can't be a last-minute panic. It has to be contractual provision. In your specifications, for any high-risk material, you need to write in pre-vetted alternatives. Instead of naming one brand of cladding, you name 3, or you specify brand X or equal.
So the contractor has options. They can pivot if one supplier has a problem.
It gives them and the client a way out.
This is why the professional exams test the difference between proprietary and non-proprietary specs, isn't it?
Absolutely. Because the risk is catastrophic. Monopoly equals vulnerability.
If you write a proprietary sole source spec for a roofing system, you're at the mercy of that one company.
If they have a strike, a price hike, anything, you have zero leverage. A non-proprietary, performance-based spec allows multiple vendors to compete, which creates redundancy and mitigates your risk.
And the final piece of this control puzzle is the submittal process. The sources say drawings are hypotheses, but submittals are proof.
I love that line. Your drawings show the design intent. The shop drawings and the material submittals are the contractor's proof that what they plan to install actually meets that intent.
It's the final quality control checkpoint.
And a crucial risk control step. If you specified a certain grade of steel, the submittal package has to include the mill certifications proving it meets the ASTM standard. Your review of those documents is a legal necessity. It's how you ensure the right material shows up on site.
A failure to do that rigorously can lead to disaster, installing the wrong, structurally inadequate material.
Or a material that doesn't meet the required fire rating. It's a huge liability.
Okay, let's bring this all together with the final scenario from the brief. A university laboratory building. It's complex, it's expensive, and mid-construction it gets hit with a 9-month delay in structural steel delivery.
This is the nightmare scenario. A total schedule collapse. Costs are escalating. The university is furious. It's a leadership crisis.
It's the architect's moment of truth. The original design has failed because of the supply chain. So what do you do?
The first step is an immediate, high-level feasibility study on alternate structural systems. You have to ask, can we pivot? Can we move from an all-steel frame to a hybrid system?
Like what? A concrete core with massed timber floors.
Exactly. Or precast concrete panels for a vertical structure. But it's not a simple swap. The engineer has to rapidly analyze if this is even possible. A switch from steel to concrete completely changes the building's weight, which has massive implications for the foundations that are already in the ground.
Which leads right to step 2, assessing the code and engineering implications. You can't compromise on safety.
Never. The building was approved with a specific fire rating based on that steel system. If you switch to mass timber, you have to prove you can achieve an equivalent fire rating, which might mean using thicker timber or adding new sprinkler systems. You have to prove the new system has equivalent strength and seismic performance.
It's a full redesign, but on an insane timeline.
Under extreme pressure.
Okay, step 3. You try to mitigate the schedule damage by resequencing the work.
Right. You look for any work that can proceed independently. While you're waiting for the new superstructure design, can the basement work continue? Can the underground utilities be installed? Can you find 4 months of float somewhere else in the schedule to absorb some of this 9-month hit?
And then the 4th step, the financial pivot. You have to analyze the cost versus delay trade-offs for the owner.
You go to the university's board and you give them a clear choice. Scenario A, we wait the 9 months for the steel, we pay the delay penalties, and the project cost goes up due to inflation. Or, scenario B, we implement this hybrid system. It might increase the upfront material cost, but it saves 6 months of delay, which saves a fortune in financing costs and gets the lab open sooner.
You're giving them a quantitative risk assessment to base their decision on.
It's your leadership recommendation.
And the final, absolutely critical step.
Yeah.
You document every single change for approvals and for your own protection.
Every change in material, every new calculation, every shift in the sequence has to be meticulously documented and signed off on by everyone the engineer, the contractor, and especially the authority having jurisdiction, the building department.
This is your legal liability shield.
It's you proving you exercise due diligence under crisis conditions.
Because the code is crystal clear. Substituted materials have to meet equivalent performance. It can't just look the same.
And that equivalency has to be proven with calculations and data, not just assumed. You have to show the building inspector the engineering that proves this new concrete beam is functionally identical to the steel beam it's replacing in every important way.
The ultimate lesson here seems to be that adaptability is now a core competency. It's the defining trait of a resilient designer.
Design isn't a fixed, static thing anymore. It's a process that has to be flexible enough to absorb these shocks from the global market without failing the client. The ability to pivot, technically and strategically, is the new measure of mastery.
So we've spent this time really diving deep into these core challenges, pulling these strategic insights straight from the KING-KAMBUF mentorship brief.
We've covered two huge pillars of uncertainty. First, mastering how you design when you know the Earth itself can move, understanding that technical choices are really acts of ethical governance.
Defining the future resilience of our cities. And second, we looked at controlling the material reality of these incredibly volatile supply chains.
Shifting the job from just static specification to dynamic resource management, making sure the thing you designed can actually get built.
Mastering these disciplines, from risk assessment and retrofit strategy to supply chain logic, it elevates your role.
It moves you beyond being a compliance expert and into being a true steward of the built environment. And that's what builds trust in your leadership.
To finish up, we want to leave you with two final provocative thoughts. Two questions drawn from the tensions we've analyzed today. The first is on seismic ethics.
If this building moves violently, what survives and why? Is it the structure, the cultural memory, or the budget?
And the second, on material reality, is a question you should ask yourself on your next project.
If the material you specify disappears from the global market tomorrow, does your design survive, or does your firm shoulder the financial liability?
Thank you for joining us for this intensive deep dive. We look forward to continuing your journey of insight and mastery.